Welcome in to another edition of the Bengal Tiger Recruiting Podcast. I am Billy Embody. With me is Shay Dixon of the Bengal Tiger, and joining us for a special rankings edition of the podcast, On3 Director of Scouting, Charles Power. Seemed like just yesterday we were all standing out there in the heat of Baton Rouge at LSU camp. Now, fast forward a few months, the final rankings for the 2023 class are complete. Chuck, how are you feeling now that they are done and that on 300 is finished up?
I would say maybe a sense of just relief, I guess. I think we're generally there's some gratification. I think we're pleased with how it came out, but of course, once you put them out, you can't change them. You can't go back and update them. So there's a sense of fingers crossed. Hopefully, some of these work out and these prospects prove us right. I'm sure some will prove us wrong for sure. But yeah, we put ours out first. So I think my interest immediately goes to, okay, what is everybody else going to do? So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But yeah, taking a second, going through, working on some database stuff, and then we'll turn the page to 2024 and get into that. I guess y'all know from covering recruiting, as long as we have that, there's really no break. It's 365, go to the next cycle. So 24 and 25 for us here pretty soon.
I'm not dealing with anyone who's talking about 25 right now. In fact, I've got a personal rule. I'm not even doing 24 until February signing day. Billy handles all that. All right. Well,
I see people saying like sending 26 stuff. I'm like, man, like that is way off my radar. Like we have a 25 watch list and we'll have to expand it to 300 relatively soon. But my general rule is I don't really start watching you until probably at least after your freshman year, because from doing this long enough, like there's so many guys that are huge 8th grade, 9th graders that just don't end up being top prospects, and there's so many top prospects that we find their senior year. So I think that's probably the mentally healthiest way to approach it.
You talk about that, Charles. We'll get to know you here in a second. But I did have this written down. People want rankings, right? So if a kid's a sophomore and you do a top 100, you've talked about this for a long time. Are you pigeonholing yourself in a way? Like, because at that point, you're only evaluating kids who actually got to play as freshmen or they saw in a camp before their sophomore year. By the time kids are seniors, you've seen so many more guys that every year we see it. These early top 100 lists, someone falls off, and you've said it before, when you have to rank them, well, the number 5 guy may end up 500 at the end of it, and then it just kind of makes you look bad.
Yeah,
what's
for
the
sure.
approach?
Yeah, for sure. It's a sample size deal at the minimum. It's a sample size, and you're so early in the development as well. So it's have they played? And there's going to be so many guys who haven't played yet. Think about if you're a quarterback and you're a backup, or you're playing another position behind a good high school player. Like you think of like a Patrick Mahomes, he was playing safety as a sophomore in high school. So there's so many situations of that where a lot of future top prospects, top NFL draft picks aren't playing as freshmen or sophomores. So for sure. And I think just generally speaking with those early rankings, like you hit the nail on the head, Shay. I think we do it from a product standpoint. I think it's a service to the fans to know, okay, these are the top underclassmen that we should keep an eye on. Especially like in our state, in our area. These are guys who are on the radar early. And a lot of times they do end up being the top prospects, but it's very loose. It's a very loose projection. And to be honest, I think when you make these early rankings, I think if you're doing it in the most honest and accurate fashion, you have to be willing to be fluid with the understanding that what we get later in the process, senior season, all-star games, that is so much more valuable than what a guy did as a 9th or 10th grader in high school. And a lot of those early rankings are really like we're working to fix mistakes we made on the initial one the entire cycle. So yeah, it's definitely a tough it's a tough one to thread a little bit with trying to project that far out. But honestly, I think that's probably really one of the more difficult things we have to do is the early rankings and trying not to back ourselves into a corner. But also too, I mean, we operate with the understanding. I think at On3, like we're probably more aggressive with moving, making moves that we need that we feel we need to do, and that's just trying to be as accurate as possible. So yeah, the early rankings are definitely a whole beast of their own for sure.
We'll keep it current on you here on this podcast. We're going to
Please.
review guys who've already signed. So that's the best part.
Yeah.
Got Charles Power on, Director of Scouting and Ranking. That is the title, right, Charles? On3.
Yeah, I believe so.
Whatever you want it to be. Give us the breakdown. Everyone knows Billy went to SMU. If people don't know, I went to LSU. It might be hard to tell sometimes. You did go to an SEC school. It just wasn't LSU. What were you doing before you got into recruiting?
Yeah, I grew up in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Went to University of South Carolina for college. Just kind of got into it there. Both my brothers play college football, so that's kind of really how I got into just following recruiting and just tracking it. I mean, I remember I started following recruiting really in high school. Like I remember watching the old like Fox Sports South TV shows. And then going to seeing a lot of guys in person. Like I just like going to high school games back then, and really kind of got into it in college. South Carolina was the state had a ton of top prospects. It really was kind of like the golden age of football players in South Carolina, which like when I was in college or like the years after. So I would go and see guys in person. Like I remember was going to see an Alshon Jeffrey play in high school, saw Jadeveon Clowney, like Cordell Patterson, Stephon Gilmore, just tried to go to those games and just kind of got into it that way. I mean, I didn't plan on getting into this really. This wasn't like, I didn't go to school for this. I just kind of, I'm sure it's probably similar to y'all. I just kind of like backed into it, but this like, it was kind of a deal where like my senior year of college, I was like, okay, like, do I want to go to law school or do I want to give this a try? And I decided I was like, yeah, I'll probably give this a try. And, got on with 24/7 Sports, covered Alabama recruiting with Tim Watts and Bama Online for 4 maybe cycles, and that was a great experience. Just getting
the 5 for 5 cycle.
Yeah, and I think learning the recruiting landscape. I think when you cover Alabama, it's probably similar with LSU. You're almost like a national analyst in that the prospects I was reporting on were from all over the country. I think one year that one class I covered for them, I think they signed players from 15 or 20 different states. So it wasn't like they were all in the backyard. Cover like a guy like Derrick Henry really closely, like Marlon Humphrey, guys like that. So you kind of understand just like the national landscape a little bit. So yeah, and then kind of got into doing national stuff. I think the evaluation side has always been kind of what I've been interested in. I remember going back in the day, like I would come home from high school and watch videos on rivals back then. So that was just kind of on YouTube, that was always kind of what interested me. So in a weird way, I guess if you asked me like what was like my dream job back when I was a senior in high school, I'm probably doing it right now. So I feel really, really fortunate or kind of grateful in that regard that it's kind of shaken out that way. And I think we're really excited about kind of what we have going on at On3. And I guess this is our maybe third rankings that we've done, probably second full cycle, or at least the senior year full cycle. So yeah, I think we're in the process of building something pretty good, and just enjoying being a part of it.
Yeah. Charles, when you get into this and you start looking at players, and you mentioned that experience covering Alabama, and it is kind of similar for Shay and for myself. I get pigeonholed sometimes into going out and seeing some of these guys, and I catch myself saying, well, he doesn't move like Jamar Chase. He doesn't move like Derek Stingley. He doesn't move like some of these guys, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. How do you try to process some of these players that are clearly you're projecting and we're projecting, and we're trying to see these players that we rank as 4 and 5 stars turn into NFL greats? how difficult is it to see some of those nuances that you have something special, especially early on with some of these players that have been 5 stars from the get-go and things like that?
Yeah, it's something we're always working on. I think just from our process, I try to go back, especially around the NFL draft period every year, and really go back and take a retroactive look on what guys who are top draft picks, which really is kind of how we judge our rankings. It's kind of the benchmark for our rankings is the NFL draft, what they look like in high school. Some of it is just my personal experience. If I did see them in high school, what did they look like? And then go back and I'll go back and watch film on those guys and look at like different markers. We're kind of into some of the analytical stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. It's definitely fun to think back on, and I think it's informative to think back on kind of what a lot of those guys look like. And nowadays too, I know it's changed a little bit over the past maybe 5 years. So much of the stuff is online now, and I think from my perspective and just from the scouting side, it's a lot more efficient to just watch games. So I probably don't go to as many high school football games as we did maybe in, I don't know, 2015 and earlier. So I think it is fun to think back on the best prospects we've seen. I know Billy, we've talked about it. It's like who's the best player you've seen. Like that's like a really fun conversation to have. And I think I've been fortunate enough to see some really good ones, and it does at times maybe set a really high bar for guys you're comparing them to. But also I think it's helpful to maybe not. It could help you in not overrating certain players or thinking that, okay, every year this is a generational running back or quarterback. It's all kind of in context. That's kind of, I guess it's kind of a buzzword people have, grabbed onto, as this is a generational, prospect. But really, it's oftentimes it's an every year thing. But I think for us too, in the rankings, it's helpful with maybe how we value certain positions. In being judicious and not over ranking guys.
What's the Cliff Notes version of why we project towards the NFL draft? Like why is that the right tool when ranking kids who are going to go to college? Like if I'm an LSU fan, I'm looking at the commit list, these rankings, I think, okay, this is going to be their impact in college. That often turns out to be the case, but why is the benchmark the NFL?
Yeah. So for a couple of reasons. One, generally speaking, the NFL draft, from everything we've looked at, everything we can find, is the best indicator of the talent and ability of a college football player. Oftentimes, the vast majority of the time, the best players in college football are early draft picks. For me, I really study rounds 1 through 3. Kind of the top 100 picks. And then because things can get a little wonky when you get in day 3, you're talking like punters getting drafted, and there's all kinds of things that can kind of throw it off a little bit. But I think, and also too, when you look at college football, oftentimes the best teams are the ones that have high draft pick totals. Think about LSU's national championship team. How many guys were picked on that team? That Alabama team they played, that game, how many NFL players, early round picks, were in that game? You think about even Cincinnati, who made the playoffs last year. What did they have? Close to 10 guys drafted, maybe it was 8 or 9 guys drafted. So I think that first off, that's a good indicator. Secondly, I think if you're going to compare rankings to the draft, it's really like the NFL draft is one of the only other times in a player's career really the only time in a player's career post high school that they are quantitatively sorted. You can actually put a number beside the player. So it just allows for a really natural comparison, unless you want to go off of an NFL top 100 player voted list, which those things are crazy. And then there's just no other real viable metric to compare it to. So I think if you're going to have a process like we do, and try to hold yourself to a certain standard and get better and grade yourself, you have to have something to judge yourself against. And the draft is really kind of just the obvious thing that you would compare it to. So that's what we've been doing for a couple of years. And I think it makes the rankings more accurate. I think it makes the process cleaner. I think if you look at recruiting rankings, dating back to 2000, they're getting increasingly more accurate. And so a lot of that, I think, is the data we have, the access to video is much more. I mean, you think about what people were looking at in 2005, they were getting VHS tapes. I mean, I remember like when I started doing this, my first month or so, I was getting DVDs. So that, I guess that probably ages us a little bit, but like, I mean, Shay, I'm sure you were getting DVDs all the time, but yeah, I mean so the access to video is a big thing. But I also think the process and having just kind of uh, a way we go about it has made everything more accurate. And I think hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll continue to improve. But I guess that's a long answer into kind of just the NFL draft thing. But it's very instructive, and it's something that we put a lot of time into for sure.
I can remember back in the day when they had the recruiting bash at LSU. So this was early 2000s to probably 2007, 8 range. And the highlight reels for kids, but this was like before Huddle, and even people weren't even loading stuff onto YouTube. And like you go like get that copy, like if you knew enough, if you were well sourced enough, you could get a copy of the DVD and then play it at your function, speaking engagement. So yeah, we were heavy in the DVD game. All right, before we dive into all LSU stuff, a couple more things. And for those listening, Charles and I are very close friends, so I know him well. He could talk all day about this, so we don't know that. We don't need that to be the route. But when did analytics and everything from hand measurements to 40 times to track times, like when did that become paramount for you or for the recruiting industry to start evaluating it? Because I feel like around the same time you started talking a ton about it, the NFL draft started really pointing out like, hey, look, you've got to be at different levels to hit in the first 3 rounds. Like there weren't just guys who weren't fast, weren't long that were getting drafted.
Yeah, I think it kind of the recruiting industry and kind of our philosophy probably closely followed that. I mean, I would not profess to be like a pioneer in that regard. And Barton Simmons was doing this at 24/7 as well. But like before I started back working there as a national guy. So Barton was looking at like shot put. That was a big thing. That turned out to be a really good indicator for like linemen, big guys. But I think there were college teams that were doing this really well, that were going after like track athletes. It might have been some college programs that were not like your top ones, for instance. So I think that was an inefficiency that they tapped into. Like I think about like Baylor in the early 2010s was basically recruiting a ton of sprinters, and nobody else was really doing that. So I think seeing that, going back and just kind of getting in the practice of going back and taking a retroactive look at top prospects, because I think there was probably a tendency just in the past to just move on and not really study it. So I think just people fully kind of dedicating to studying it and trying to be accurate, like not making it a deal where like we're really going to take the order and the rankings seriously. So that's for sure is something. And I think for us too, like it makes the process more organized. It helps separate guys. It creates a deal where it's not as subjective at times. Now, I think there's situations where you need the subjectivity. Like there is a human element to this, and you have to be able to, judge video, like judge film, be able to deduce things from a football player standpoint. Like we aren't like robots. We aren't sorting them off of arm length or 40 times or whatever, but it all adds context, I think, and makes it just a lot cleaner process. And to be honest, is highly predictive when you look at it. So I think like all these evaluations, it's really, I kind of like compare it to like a puzzle or like a mosaic kind of deal, like a painting where it's a lot of things coming together to form one big picture. And for us, I think we just try to get as much as we can to kind of create as accurate a picture as we have for the prospect. So, and it's fun too, like going back and looking at some of these guys when they're NFL prospects. You see, it's really kind of scary how you see a lot of the same things from them from high school to college when going into the NFL. So I think it's something that is really helpful. And from following the NFL draft, I think we've seen NFL draft coverage kind of tap into a lot of the high school backgrounds and whatnot. So I think it's becoming a deal where it's just this whole kind of macro, just football ecosystem that is all together, where it's not high school, college, NFL. It's just the whole picture, and that's really kind of what we're trying to do at On3 is just tell the story from high school all the way through the NFL. So I think it all goes together pretty seamlessly.
Now, looking at some of these LSU guys that you've looked at, and Shay, if we have one more on the NFL, I mean, one thing, and you kind of mentioned it, I think, as you look at the LSU guys you've evaluated, who's somebody that you look back on now and you're probably most proud of? You know, you were high on them early, and they hit, and they're, you know, at the next level right now, you know, doing it at a very, very high level.
Well, I mean, Stingley, obviously, everybody knew Derek Stingley was incredible. I mean, I wrote a story, I think, when he was coming out saying he was the best corner that I think we've evaluated, or one of the best corner prospects ever. Lived up to that as a, what was he picked? 3? Like 2 or 3 or something, 3 or something. So yeah, I think he lived up to that. The talent was real for sure. In terms of recent guys, like BJ Ojolari was one that we were pretty high on. You know, Keyshawn Boutte, I think I remember at the time, you know, when if you think back to LSU's class that year, they had Rakim Jarrett, Jermaine Burton, and Boutte, and then, you know, Jarrett and Burton flipped on signing day. And I remember we were talking about it, like, hey man, like LSU might have actually gotten the best of these 3, which you know, Boutte's career has kind of been up and down a little bit, but I still think it's pretty safe to say was the best of those 3. So, you know, I thought he was a 5-star talent, and still believe he is, regardless of however his career shakes out. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been a lot of those guys over the years. I think, you know, generally speaking, I think we have a relatively good track record of hitting on a lot of the best LSU players. And I think one thing too, you know, kind of the landscape in Louisiana and LSU, I think, is important to understand. I mean, I know Shay and I talk about this all the time, but a lot of times the guys who end up being the best players at LSU are kind of these local in-state prospects who, a guy like maybe like a Patrick Queen,
perfect example,
DJ Chark, guys like that, like Russell Gage, like the ones who maybe don't have a ton of recruiting hype, crazy offers, but there's so much talent just in LSU's backyard. I think when you have those guys in the back of your class, that's just a great recruiting strategy, and something I think that is really helps separate LSU as, you know, I think you could argue LSU has the best recruiting, like the strongest recruiting footprint of any program in the United States. And I think that the fact that there's that kind of untapped talent in Louisiana every year, with guys who, once you get them in a program, have a lot of developmental upside. I think that makes LSU a special place, and really why so many different coaches have won national championships at LSU. Like I think it's something to do with the talent you can recruit within your, you know, several hour radius of Baton Rouge.
And look, even when they miss on guys, they can still go on to have success. 5 for 5. They missed on a few guys. For those that didn't pick up earlier, Charles was working at the Bama site at the time. We were down at the Trop in St. Pete. That was before they moved the game. Do you have a best 5 for 5 memory? Because you really were you were just in the 1-for-1 camp. You really weren't worried about everybody else.
Yeah, we were tracking Jalen Tabor as well that day. I think just Jalen Tabor and Travis Rudolph.
Nobody cares about the other 2 kids that announced that day.
Yeah. So I think the craziest thing to me was the rumors that Nick Saban was there was a Nick Saban Leonard Fournette package deal to Texas, and that was after Tony Brown had committed to Alabama.
That was my favorite part.
Yeah, that was the most bananas. Like, that was like, okay, like this day is completely off the rails. But I had some wild experiences back when prospect, like the big guys were announcing at All-Star games, which they, like, is much less common now with the early signing period. But I had some wild experiences with like the Landon Collins thing. I was like on the stage for that, and then it was 2 years later you have the 5-for-5, and like for as much.
And Landon's mom was back again for
Gerald.
Gerald.
She was back, and she did not waste time in
same energy
in making a statement out there. She actually made a statement, I think, a little faster the second go around. But I looking back on the 5-for-5, I know it's really kind of like a funny story now, but LSU made out like they got the 2 best guys out of the 5 by
2
far.
top 10 picks. I don't think the other 3 got drafted. Did Tony Brown get drafted? I know the other
maybe late rounds. I think he's still kind of bouncing around the NFL, bouncing around teams. But yeah, I mean, actually worked out good for LSU in the end. So that was one of the more wild days, or just couple days I think of in my couple of years of covering recruiting. That's one, Shay, you gotta keep whenever you write your book. That's gotta be one of the chapters.
We're printing shirts soon for the LSU shop. Someone had a great description the other day. They were like, "Oh, it stings so much." Like it might have been a Desmond Ricks even. They're like, like, "Oh, he went to Bama. This feels like this could be worse than 5-for-5." And someone said, "No, Desmond Ricks just ripped off the Band-Aid in a second. 5-for-5 played out over about a 3-hour time period where it felt like gut punch after punch for LSU. Still one of the best recruiting stories.
If I'm not mistaken, it was kind of like wasn't Speedy Noel the first one? So it was like whenever Speedy committed to A&M, it was like, oh wow, like this might go off the rails.
And Jamal Adams was early because I feel like people were like, I'd already forgotten about Jamal by the time others had gone and not picked LSU.
That was, and he was kind of almost like a foregone conclusion, right? That it was LSU. Like, wasn't it? Like, I don't even remember who else was in the mix.
Well, nothing was a foregone conclusion for 5-for-5. Evidently, our info is not correct. But yes, those 2.
That's true. That was all. Yeah, that was also like in the early days of like recruiting predictions and crystal ball and the whole kind of deal there. So that was an interesting day just in the recruiting industry for sure.
Last one on the national front. And speaking of things that are sometimes hard to get right, what's the toughest position to eval and get consistently right? I know you had quite the task with corners, for example, this year.
Yeah. Generally speaking, corners is a tough one for sure, because it is it's from watching a high school corner. I think it's become a little easier given now that we can go through entire games and watch full games. If you're trying to rank a corner off highlight tapes, that can be difficult. And a lot of corners might play like receiver in high school, but I think corner is a little easier for us now than it used to, because we kind of can lean on analytics. We can look at track times, which are highly predictive with corners, extremely predictive. But like for me, I kind of boil it down to speed, ball skills, size, length. So that's all things we kind of factor in. So corner is a little bit more of like an athlete stopwatch position, maybe more so than like a position like receiver, which is just basically like a skill position. At receiver, you're evaluating physical traits, but also really how productive they are and just how skilled they are as a receiver. Like tight end is a tough one nowadays, because I think if you look at the draft, there's so many tight ends. There's no real like developmental arc that's a prototype for tight ends. Like they're coming from everywhere. Like you have guys who are like college basketball players who don't play football until college or might not play football at all. You have like high school quarterbacks who become tight ends. Like I think about several picks in the last couple of years that were like big quarterbacks that were drafted high. And then when you're looking at the tight end position, period, you have guys who are big receivers. You have ones that are blocking in line. It's probably pretty rare you find a true actual hand in the dirt tight end who is in high school who becomes a top draft pick. So that's one that is difficult. I would say like linebacker is also one that's a little tough to project, just in terms of there's so many multi-positional athletes. You have guys who are safeties in high school, receivers, running backs. There's a lot of running backs that become linebackers. Obviously, it's easier if they do play some defense for sure. But linebacker is kind of like corner in that it's really kind of becoming an athlete position. Like arm length is something that is like very increasingly important. Like if you look at recent NFL drafts, like you would have asked any Georgia fan who's getting drafted first, Nakobe Dean or Quay Walker. They're 10 of 10 are saying Nakobe Dean during the football season. Well, Quay Walker got drafted higher because he is bigger, faster, and longer. It's just kind of that basically. So that's one. And obviously quarterback. I mean, quarterback is such a volatile position to evaluate. There's so many factors that go into it. I think that's it. If someone had an answer for how to hit on quarterback, they'd be a millionaire, if not a billionaire. So I think that's something that you're constantly trying to work on and get better at. But at every level, quarterback is a difficult one too.
Well, we're going to move into some LSU questions with Charles, more specific LSU questions, I should say, in a second. But first, Shay and I have to do a little housekeeping here. We've got to look at our great relationship, as I get it up on the site there on YouTube for us, our great relationship with Rogue Shop, rogueshop.com. We've got our friends Richard and Shar running their business out of Wisconsin, small indoor cannabis grow and manufacturing center. And they want to also educate the population while they run this small batch sustainable plant medicine small business. They sell Delta 8 products, Delta 9, CBD, and HHC. It's all lab direct. They don't use any middlemen when building their products and putting them together. I know the pain cream. I slept on my neck wrong. I'm probably going to use it tonight and let that kind of work in there. But if you have issues sleeping, if you have issues with stress, anxiety, and all of those things, insomnia and chronic pain, check out rogueshop.com. You can use Bengal Tiger. That's the promo code for 10% off. And if you have any questions, jump on the site, rogueshop.com. You're very likely going to end up talking to Richard or Shar themselves with the live chat. It pops up. I'll be on there looking at the site here and there, and boom, there's Richard or Shar who are chatting with us and answering our questions. As we learn more about this too. I like the pain cream. I like being able to just target certain areas and let them kind of get better. But who knows? Maybe try some gummies or pre-rolls or things like that as we go through this great new partnership that we've been working with Rogue Shop on for the last month, Shay.
I've been sleeping like a baby. My package came in. They've got the tinctures in there, which is just like the liquid drops of CBD. And then he put some gummies, a few other things. Richard sent me a nice care package, and out like a light. Woke up feeling energized, ready to do long podcasts like this.
Yeah. If you want to support a veteran-owned business, husband and wife shop, check out rogueshop.com. They're also in the business of consulting people on cannabis. Their consulting company is DGIY, Don't Grow It Yourself. So they're really in this to help people. Again, sleep, chronic pain, anxiety, insomnia, all that stuff. These are the types of products that can help you guys through that. So check them out. Appreciate their support of the podcast, as well as helping out Bengal Tiger subscribers as well with Bengal Tiger. That's the promo code for 10% off at rogueshop.com. Moving back into our podcast with Charles Power, now at the bottom of your screen on the YouTube page if you're watching this. Charles, this cycle for LSU in the 2023 class was pretty much headlined by Dashawn, Womack, and Zalance as far as the 5 stars for On3. One, a Louisiana prospect who On3 was highest on for a long, long time. From the beginning, Dashawn Womack, a guy that finishes as a 5-star who's been on this upward trajectory for a long time as well. You're familiar with the roster. We talked about BJ Ojulari earlier. Emory Jones was somebody that we were high on as well. Finished actually above Will Campbell, I believe, in the rankings, and started at right tackle a good bit. Do you see Dashawn Womack and Zalance Hurd being able to break into the starting lineup in 2023 for the Tigers?
I think they definitely have that ability for sure. I mean, a lot of this comes down to situation, opportunity. Y'all would know a lot more about that than me, but I think Zalance Hurd has a shot of maybe being LSU's starting right tackle next year, and I think that would give you the option to slide Emory Jones inside, which I think he's probably most natural as a guard, just long term. But I think seeing Zalance Hurd in person at Under Armour just kind of solidified like our belief that I think he is probably more ready to go than people give him credit for. This is a guy who has not played offensive line for very long, but just given his physical ability, the length, how big he is, he's added size. I think he probably will need to reshape his body a little bit. I think he could. I don't know his exact weight, but I would guess he's probably over 320 right now. I think if he could trim down and put up, like, just get in the weight program for a little bit, I think he's a guy who would continue to benefit there. But just given his just the mass and the length, the athletic ability, and his, like, I think he's really phenomenal just as like a run blocker, as a people mover. I think our comp for him was DJ Fluker. And DJ Fluker is kind of that quintessential, just big bodied, long right tackle. I think Zalance Hurd would be a great fit there. Kind of once he gets up to the speed of just pass blocking every play, I think that's probably an area where he can continue to improve. But seeing him at Under Armour, I think he might have lost like his first or second rep in one-on-ones. It was really pretty strong after that. Like he's a pretty quick study just off of his, I think, natural ability, and just the nasty demeanor, I think, transfers over well. Billy, I know that you've seen him in person. Like, he was going head to head with Matthew Fobbs White, the Tulane signee, who we're really high on. Like, I think Matthew Fobbs White was a complete steal for Tulane. Like, he is really good. I think going against him in practice every day at Neville really helped him, kind of iron sharpens iron situation. So I would not be surprised if Zalance comes in and is ready to play. And from what y'all have told me, and from what what people are saying, he has that mentality. Like, he's coming in, he's trying to be the left tackle, not even the right tackle. So he and Will Campbell, that's a really unique situation, having two bookend tackles, same high school. That's honestly how I kind of came upon Zalance Hurd. I was watching Will Campbell, Walker Howard, AJ Allen play, and I was like, who in the world is this right tackle? Like, he was the guy I was just like completely fixated on, just watching like a Neville live stream. So I think he's definitely got a shot to play early for sure. And Dashawn Womack, I think if you look at the edge prospects in this cycle, it would be he and Keon Keeley are the two that I would put as ready to play day one guys at edge, which is not really a position you see a ton of instant impact true freshmen at. There's a little bit of development there that I think is kind of required typically. But I think he is a little ahead of the curve relative to some others, kind of in that 5-star range, just developmentally, physically. You see Womack in person, he is like a solid 245 as a high school senior. And this isn't a guy, he's not older for his class. He's in the right grade. So it's not like he like matured earlier or anything like that. He's a legit 245, runs in the 4.7s. And I think what really impressed us about him was just the pure pass rush skills, technical ability. We saw it at Future 50, Billy. I remember we were sitting there like just talking about like how technical he was with his hands. A guy who is, I think, has, outside of just the pure physical traits, has a natural knack for rushing the passer. And then you see what he did during the season this year. I think you had him at 15 sacks in 10 games. And I know he was dominant.
7 tackles for loss or something.
Yeah. I mean, so in St. Francis is playing a national schedule. Like, he's not playing, little high schools or anything like that. And I know he was dominant in big games. Like Billy, I know like that DeSoto game, we talked about that. I mean, DeSoto won the state championship in Texas, and Dashawn Womack was the best player in the field by far, like wrecked DeSoto's offense. So I think when you go and look at his senior year and what he did against top competition, how polished he is, he moved up for us in this final rankings on his senior season. And had he been able to play an all-star game, could have been higher. Like, I think you could look back at this and say, well, like, I mean, ranking him 12, or I think wherever, I think he finished 12, one spot behind Zalance. Ranking him 12 might have been too low if he, like has that. I think he has that potential to be one of the top edge prospects, and maybe even the top edge prospect in the class. So I think for LSU to get him at a premium position from a powerhouse high school that has dozens of recruiters coming through there weekly, I would say during eval periods, I think landing him from out of state, I mean, that's huge. And I would not be surprised if both those guys are impact freshmen. I wrote a story that's out on On3 today, or as we're recording this on what's today, Wednesday or no, Thursday. So I like of 5-star instant contributors. And both those guys are ones that we would highlight as like top 10 5-stars who could make impacts as freshmen.
Is there LSU fans like comps, or is like Caleb on Chase on only played football a couple of years? You had him pretty high at 24/7, but he comes out of North Shore, which is a monster program. Like Ojolari, same position, coming out of Marietta, monster program. Is Womack significantly better than those guys at this stage?
I think there's less questions with him at this stage. K'Lavon Chason was really kind of, a late bloomer to football, guy who was a basketball player. I mean, y'all like, I'm sure y'all know the story. LSU fans know the story. Showed up at camp, got an offer before he had even played high school football. So yeah, I mean, I think Womack's more accomplished there. BJ Ojolari was an interesting one because, he was playing at a powerhouse high school in Marietta with like Eric Gilbert and all those guys. Like played both sides of the ball. Actually played a little offensive tackle. Didn't have a ton of video, so it was kind of the eval for him was based off of watching Marietta games more so than just like him putting together like a highlight or just kind of running through like a traditional video evaluation. So you had to kind of be a little more resourceful with him, but he was super productive as well. But I think Womack comes into college more developed than both of those. If you were making a comparison, which is why he's ranked higher, to be honest. I think he has that upside, but he's also got a high floor as well. So I think you have to be really excited about both those guys if you're LSU.
I do want to make like one note here on Zalance Hurd. You had him as a 5-star when he probably had 3 offers, an in-state, a Nebraska offer. It was kind of like a random group.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes fans and don't want to pump our own tires, too much, just because, like you said earlier in the podcast, there's guys that make us look bad and all those things. But sometimes the recruiting services can get out and either see guys in person more, which we're legally allowed to do, than the college coaches. And also, we're not sitting there hosting guys on Friday nights for visits ahead of games. We're able to watch a lot of these guys play. I mean, how good of a feeling is it that On3 had Zalance Hurd as a 5-star pretty much from the get-go? And, LSU rolls around in, I think, February, March, and ends up offering him.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those deals where, like, honestly, my biggest questions about Zalance Hurd were not really ability. It's like, okay, like, am I missing something here with like, why aren't the offers rolling in? Or also too, he was also kind of, I think at the time, still entertaining the possibility of playing defensive line, which was something, I think he doesn't have the same upside as a defensive lineman relative to offensive line, which is, I think pretty typical of an OLDL type prospect. There's a couple in this class that I think would have a higher draft potential and just overall potential on the offensive line, and are going to probably try to play D line. And that's something that I think you probably have to factor into rankings, I guess, if you're projecting a little bit. But we also kind of operate from a standpoint of, I think, typically players and teams find their best position. At least you would hope that. I mean, that's really how we look at it. A lot of times prospects can be, when that conversation comes up, saying, oh, like, why are you ranking me here when I want to play here? They take it as a slight, which really it's like we're trying to look at you in the best light possible. And project you as high as possible. And I think that's a positive way to look at it, to be honest. But with Hurd, yeah, I mean, I think that was one that I think we feel pretty good about. That was what, like, we were early on him. I think with linemen, that's just a position I've tried to study a lot. And I think, I guess I would probably say is, I think my best position at evaluating, if you had to say, like, what's the one you feel the best about. And I think it really comes down to, you have to be willing to project. Like, you have to look at, like, tools that matter, which to me is like frame, length, movement skills. Obviously you want physicality, which I think Hurd, that's one area that immediately popped out to me, is he is a nasty guy. Like, he is physical. There's no finesse to his game at all. So you weigh that as well. But I think, college coaches can get in the habit a little bit of valuing your 300-pounder, 330-pounder, who is as a 10th grader. And those guys, a lot of times, if you look at just the track record, don't hit as much as ones who are maybe a little leaner, more athletic, maybe play defensive line, multiple positions, play basketball, wrestle, throw the shot put. That can just be a better indicator. I think, like, the guy, like, Hurd was almost kind of like our Charles Cross this year. Like, Charles Cross is one who, I think my first thing at 24/7 was, we have to move this guy up, way up. I think he was committed to Florida State at the time, ended up signing with Mississippi State, became a top 10 draft pick. Didn't have a ton of, the SEC was not lining up for Charles Cross. But I think if you're willing to project, and not go for the guy who looks like a finished product when he's in 10th or 11th grade, I think you can hit a lot of the offensive linemen. And I think Hurd was one that's probably a good example of that. And also too, like, I mean, shoot, like, this isn't like Zalance Hurd was a 260-pounder. Like, you got him on the scale, I got LSU camp, I think he was 308. So there was less questions with him, I think, and less projection involved with him than typical of that kind of high upside offensive line prospect. But also too, some of it might have been, that was his first year playing O-line as a junior at Neville, transferred high school. So that's a factor as well. But I feel good about the Zalance Hurd one for sure. And it's, I think just from a general industry perspective, it's probably good that he's ranked high everywhere, because I think that's one we'll look back on. I'll look back on and say that was a good one for sure.
Well, we don't want to keep Charles forever, but we do have, so we'll maybe lightning round this here to go. We're not going to hit on all these kids, but those are your 5 stars. A lot more guys in your top 300, Charles, but one guy who's not, and we'll let you lump him in with the receivers here, Kyle Parker. And this is for Hester on the board, who has been begging to have his moment to talk with Charles Power about Kyle Parker, a signee out of the Texas area, 4-star. Comes in with Jalen Brown. They get him out of Miami, another 4-star, and then Shelton Sampson, obviously here in Baton Rouge. Your thoughts on those guys? Because you had Shelton's a top 100 guy, Jalen Brown's a top 150 guy, and then Kyle Parker is obviously not in the 300. Start with Parker. What are your thoughts on him? Because it seems physically he actually might be the most ready to play, maybe just not long-term the top talent.
Yeah, I think Kyle Parker comes in extremely polished. This is a guy who works really hard at his route running. He's working with trainers, comes from a high school program in Texas, Lucas Lovejoy, that is just really well coached. So I think it's going to be not a tough transition for him at all to LSU. And I think of those 3, just from a polish and development standpoint, yeah, he's certainly the most advanced. I like looking at his skill set. I think he is a high volume possession, probably slot receiver, a guy who you can just throw underneath intermediate routes to. Watching him this year, he's really good after the catch. I think he's got some natural tackle breaking ability. He's not going to blow you away from a physical perspective in terms of just like the speed or size necessarily, but highly skilled, tough. I think he'll do dirty work for you and pick up yards after the catch. So with that group, just in general, I think when you look at receiver rooms and receiver classes, you want to have a variety of skills. You don't want a bunch of redundancy, I think, at receiver. I think when you're looking at a receiver room, I think one of the best ways you could build it is just to kind of view it like a basketball team, like various guys who can do different roles, because you kind of want that that variety on the field for you. So you look at Jalen Brown. Jalen Brown, I think, is like a Z receiver, like field stretcher guy who can pull over a safety with his ability to run deep. Jaylen Brown is interesting. I think there were probably some questions with him just off his senior year, like the play strength, and just I think he's a guy who probably will really benefit from getting in the weight room at LSU. But he looked like, I think he helped himself a good bit seeing him at the All-American Bowl. He was very good out there. I thought he caught the ball well. His speed translated running against top corners. So he's a guy who might, I would not be surprised if Jaylen Brown outplayed his ranking, to be honest. The receiver group is pretty deep this year, and it is a splitting hairs thing when you're stacking all those guys up, kind of with like nationally, especially kind of once you get out, like once you go from 50 to probably 125, 150, it becomes a very tight deal. And, we can't have 30 receivers in the top 100. So you have to kind of tier it out a little bit amongst other positions. I think we had 16 maybe in the top 100, which is probably about the number that you see in an NFL draft. You typically see 15 receivers on average go in the top 100 picks. So that's kind of what we're benchmarking for. But if you told me Jaylen Brown was one of those top 15 guys, if not a top 10 guy, I wouldn't be shocked based on what we saw. I think he has that upside. And then Shelton Sampson, I think you would project as like your X receiver. So you have like Parker as a kind of your slot volume guy. Jaylen Brown as your X, and then Shelton Sampson Jaylen Brown as your Z, and then Shelton Sampson as your X. Shelton was a guy who we had as a 5-star early on. I think he has a lot going for him. He's big, fast, was productive at Catholic this year. And I think he has a lot of potential. Will continue to get better. I think seeing him in person, this is my first time seeing him in person at Under Armour. I think he has a little more development than we thought to go. He's younger for the class, so I think that'll be time. Is he a guy who's going to play early? I'm not sure, but I still think he has a lot of upside. And his strengths are really just, I think the size and speed combo is good, and then he can go up and win at the catch point. Which I think if Shelton Sampson hits, it's going to be because he is consistently winning at the catch point. So I think that's going to be the biggest driver in kind of how he shakes out at LSU in long term. If he becomes that guy who is just bodying defensive backs, boxing guys out in air, and winning in contested situations, and becomes that like go-to target, I think that's the scenario you would hope for if you're an LSU fan with Shelton Sampson.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Pretty much nailed it on all those guys. And I think one guy you talk about the catch point and going up and getting it, Kamorian Pimpton. You bumped him up into the top 100, number 4 tight end in the country. Looked good at the All-America Bowl. I mean, at times didn't get the targets, probably deserved as far as how open he was at times. But, I saw him as a senior in person, and you had a ton of production to go over as you sifted through that senior tape and bumped him up, I think, in the top 150 about halfway through his senior season. What are your expectations for Kamorian Pimpton now that he heads to Baton Rouge this summer?
Yeah, Kamorian Pimpton is one of the biggest risers, I think, over the course of his senior year, really nationally. When you look at like top 100 prospects, there's probably, I don't know, like 10 maybe who were kind of 3-star types or viewed in that light entering the fall. And like I said earlier, like the senior year is for us huge in this. It's just, I think it's on average the biggest factor in really kind of trying to pinpoint how good a player is going to be long term. So Pimpton, I think, is an interesting deal where, watching him, he was initially committed to Vanderbilt. Great find by our friend, former colleague Barton Simmons at Vandy. They identified him as a high upside tight end. I don't think he had a ton of production at his previous school. What do you remember what school he went to, Billy, before he transferred to North Crowley?
I believe it was Brewer,
maybe. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
4 with Brewer. So didn't have a ton of production. I mean, his measurables are off the charts. I think so. Getting that on him, I think anybody would see his size and arm length. I mean, he's 6'6", 225 with 36-inch arms. I think he's some of the longest arms of any prospect in the cycle. LSU might have signed 2 of the top, I don't know, 5 to 10 longest prospects out of anybody with he and Zalance Hurd. So, I mean, that's a feather in LSU's cap for sure. But So I think his measurables, I think he's a 50+ foot shot put thrower as well. So we had that stuff on him. We didn't have his arm length, but we knew he was a high upside tight end kind of going into the season. Well, and then fast forward, he transfers into North Crowley and just completely goes off, like changed their team. It made I think they were undefeated in the regular season. I'm watching stuff during the fall on like Friday nights, and he is like a complete mismatch in the passing game. I think of all the pass catchers in this cycle, there's like conservatively speaking, Pimpton is in the top 2 or 3 largest catch radiuses of anyone that we looked at, receiver or tight end. There's maybe one or two other guys you can maybe throw into that mix, but his ability to go up and in high point and just the length and just the overall breadth of where he can make catches is like special and pretty unique. So I think he at the minimum is going to be a big time like red zone goal line target, jump ball. He is going to, I would be surprised if he doesn't catch a ton of jump ball touchdowns at LSU. And yeah, I think one of the things that I think will determine his ultimate ceiling, kind of drawing it back to kind of like what I said about Shelton Sampson. I think if Kamorion Pimpton, and he has the chance to be the best tight end in this class. If he is that guy, it's gonna really, I think, come down to just the movement skills and lateral agility as a route runner. That was the one thing that I think, like how much he improves that at LSU is going to decide if he's like a first rounder. I think the ball skills and his ability to win at the catch point is going to translate like immensely. But how much he can get open within his routes, pick up yards after the catch, and just the movement skills is going to be a big factor. I think he, like, see him in person, Billy. Like, I mean, I don't know if you agree or not, but I think he's pretty athletic. Like he moves well. I think it's just going to be continuing to work at it, and just become more of a technician. I think that's going to be something with him. And just to bring it back to like LSU, just from a big picture standpoint, I think when you look at this class, you think about what like the positions that Brian Kelly really made hay on at Notre Dame: offensive line, tight end. I think LSU hit home runs at both positions, and that's something that he's brought to LSU. So I think that's big. And when you look at college football now, you look at how Georgia uses their tight ends. I mean, if you can run multiple tight end sets in modern college football, that really kind of gives you a little bit of like a skeleton key with how you can attack defenses. So you talk about putting Pimpton, Jackson McGohan, some of these, Mason Taylor, of course, like some of these guys that LSU has on the field at the same time would be great for their offense. And I also, too, I would add, I think Pimpton has upside as a blocker. He's obviously strong. He's obviously strong and super long. And I think he's got some toughness about him. So once he continues to add weight to his frame, if he's a 250-pound guy, I think he's an inline tight end, which is, I think adds just a complete different dimension to him as an overall, player and prospect. So it'll be really fun to kind of see what he looks like after a year or so in the strength program. And I want to say he's younger for the class as well. So he's got a late July birthday. So this is a guy who won't turn 18.
Super young.
He'll be on campus. I mean, he really could be a 24.
He's kind of got a baby face, so it's not surprising.
Yeah, he's really got a 24. And that's one thing too, just from a like overall evaluation standpoint, a trend that I've noticed, I'm probably gonna write a story on this. A trend that I've noticed this year is late birthday guys popping, like rising later. That's like senior risers, guys who develop later. Kind of bringing it back to like the early rankings thing. A lot of these guys who pop up on the radar early tend to be a little older, and I think the later birthday, younger prospects tend to develop at a later rate. I mean, I think we're talking about 16 to 18-year-olds in physical maturity. So I think the fact that Pimpton still, like, he's this good and he's 17 years old, had just turned 17 when the season started, it's really kind of scary. I mean, he's got a ton of potential. So I think he was a huge flip for LSU. And he was not like, y'all can back me up on this, but he was not an easy flip from Vandy. I mean, he kind of fit the Vanderbilt profile. Like, he's an academic guy. So, I think that was the fact that LSU could come in and flip him late. I think says a lot about their recruiting efforts, and the evaluation is strong too. LSU was on him early, like relatively speaking, to him kind of blowing up as a senior. So I think that was a great job by LSU's whole organization with Kamorian Pimpton.
He used the word sanguine to describe his LSU offer.
Yeah, that's the first time I've ever seen sanguine in any recruiting media.
Well, we'll wrap up here. We've got 2 more for you, Charles. I told Charles to come on and we do like 30 minutes, and now we've done double that because we just like to talk. And this is probably the best insight we've gotten since we've been on the recruiting pod. But Charles, I'll tell you this. Here we go. I'm going to give you a stat line, and you tell us your reaction, kind of what you're thinking moving forward. My man had 104 tackles, 72 solo, 20 tackles for loss, nearly, couple sacks, couple forced fumbles, fumble recovery, couple fumble recoveries returned for a touchdown. Oh, and he put up 800 yards and 16 touchdowns on offense. None other than your boy Whit Weeks, who I can remember multiple times during this year. And Charles would watch. He'd watch all the Catholic Eye and Newman and Zalance Herd, Neville games, Neville Network, whatever it's called, that they run everything on. So you'd be watching all these guys, and you would watch Weeks out of Georgia stuff, and you would tell me multiple times, like, bro, this guy's actually not bad. He's pretty good. Well, come to find out, you nearly put him into the top 100. What did you see total body of work? Because you got to see him in person in San Antonio too.
Yeah. Whit Weeks was one of the biggest risers at the All-American Bowl for us, period. After seeing all those linebackers in San Antonio. Again, I think Whit Weeks was a great evaluation by LSU. He had college interest. I know Georgia looked at him seriously in Wade going after him. In Georgia, I think, on paper, at least in terms of just the industry consensus rankings, signed the top linebacker class in the country. So he was one that I think college coaches were higher on than the rankings initially. And LSU was 100% right about Whit Weeks based on what we've seen. I think he's probably a guy that LSU took, and y'all would know the fan reaction better than me, but it was probably not, a ton of buzz or headlines about Weeks when he committed, but obviously he's just on the field on Friday nights. He is just a 3-phase football player, a guy who can do a little bit of everything. I think the play speed checks out on film when you watch him. He's kind of all over the place, making plays, special teams, offense, defense. But it was really it was like a revelatory performance to see him at the All-American Bowl with a lot of these other top linebackers. There really was a pretty strong linebacker group there. I mean, you had Anthony Hill, who signed with Texas, Samuel Omasigo, really physically talented guy who signed with OU. But out of all the linebackers there, Whit Weeks was the best cover guy. He was phenomenal in one-on-ones. And then when they went to team, or 7-on-7 or 11-on-11, he was great there too. I think his instincts and just the natural cover ability was great. And that's something that the overall athleticism doesn't always transfer to a linebacker being able to cover. You think about maybe a Devin White. Devin White is a freak from a size speed perspective, but he is at his best as a blitzer. Covering isn't his natural skill set. There's a little bit of nuance and fluidity and just skill level that's involved in a linebacker covering. The guys who run the best 40 times aren't always the best cover backers. So that's something that you really can kind of see. You have to kind of watch it happen to see it. It's not as much of a projectable thing. And we saw Whit Weeks do that. So that was great. I mean, I think Weeks is going to just have to maybe get a little stronger, continue adding size to hold up at the point of attack, which I really don't have a ton of doubt that he will. But I think the side, his frame checks out, just the instincts. This is a guy who is all around the field. He's he just is like a magnet to the ball. So I think there's just a lot of really positive things you could draw from him. And I think probably after maybe a year or so in the strength program, I think he'll be ready to go I would probably project him as a multi-year starter at LSU and maybe just a standout on their defense. So great eval by LSU. And definitely ahead of the curve, ahead of the rankings on that one. But I hope we caught up enough to get it right.
Wow. Okay. All right. Look, first of all, Lundy's dying right behind Shay over there.
I was going to say shout out. I was going to say shout out to Lundy.
Yeah,
Shout out
like,
Lundy.
I thought she passed. Yeah, I thought she was gone on us.
I woke her up. So this last one for Charles, and we'll get him out of here. Actually, the last one.
I'm getting out of here too. Yeah,
we'll have him back on same time next week, right? A guy we haven't talked about. Who would be your pick out of the class who could really shine? A name or two, if you'd like, that could really shine and hit, however you want to word it, outperform his ranking or whatever, or even hit at a high level for us that's in this 2023 recruiting class for LSU. If you had to pick, one, who would you lean toward?
Yeah, well, I'll talk about somebody that I guess that we haven't talked about. I think Dylan Carpenter is one who, like, we talked about the Louisiana prospects who are kind of, maybe under the radar, in-state guys, like kind of late risers. I think Carpenter is one who could outplay his ranking. He was committed to Louisiana, right? Initially. So, LSU obviously knows their backyard better than anybody. So I think to come in, and the fact that he was the in-state, G5 commit that they prioritized, flipped, says a lot about him. I think he's got a good frame. The measurables are good. I think he will be able to continue to add weight. Very athletic. He is, I think, an all-region basketball player, a guy who plays above the rim. I think will surprise people with how athletic he is. Tough. And I think he has a lot of upside to continue getting better in terms of just pass rush ability. Like, he's kind of a guy who out there right now is just playing football, running the ball down. I think he has some upside and room for development to continue just improving as a pass rusher. Let's see, looking at the commit list, I think Ashton Stamps is one who's interesting as could be a potential corner safety. Could do a lot of different things for you from just a versatility standpoint. We got to see him in camp. I think he's a guy who has the right approach, and just, if you look at him maybe as a potential safety, I really like his cover ability as a high school corner who could project as a safety, kind of be that free safety type. And I mean, I don't think you can talk about LSU's haul this year without probably mentioning some of the transfers. I think LSU's done really well in the portal as well. Think about Aaron Anderson. I mean, that's that's kind of a little bit of a mulligan, I guess, landing Aaron Anderson out of the portal. Several of those other guys. I mean, I liked Deuce Chestnut. I thought he was a true freshman All-American type guy at Syracuse. Obviously Denver Harris is a top talent at corner. I mean, I think Denver Harris, if he's locked in, Denver Harris is a first rounder, lockdown SEC #1 corner. I mean, he was starting against Alabama and really, I thought, acquitting himself pretty well when A&M played them this year. So if everything's right with Denver Harris, I mean, he has star potential. So I think when you look at what LSU's done in the portal to supplement what is a really good first full recruiting class for Brian Kelly, I think the talent in Baton Rouge is certainly trending up. And I think the biggest thing too is the bump they're going to get off of an SEC championship appearance season will probably be more felt in 24 than 23, because they have the whole off season and cycle to really sell that to the prospects. So I think, just generally speaking, you have to be really, really excited with kind of the overall trajectory of the roster and the recruiting that LSU's put together.
Well, look, Charles, I mean, Shay, do you have anything else? Just say thank you and let him go. We've kept him hostage now for.
No, do we ask him if he's on the NUS bus or the JD5 train? Is that where it's the next thing?
Yes, I'll roll with Jaden Davis just based, or Jalen Daniels, sorry, just based off of liking him so much in high school. I mean, I was huge.
You had him #1 dual threat. That was back when
I was a huge Jalen Daniels guy. So we'll
that was back when we did dual threat. Y'all got away from that. It's just quarterback now.
Yeah. So it's crazy to think he's in his I guess going into his fifth year.
Fifth year.
Yeah. We'll see how that shakes out. I think regardless, LSU's got that's probably a good problem to have.
No, absolutely. Yeah, Billy, I'm good. I want Ashton. That Ashton Stamps is my pick, so I'm good.
Yep. I think Caleb Jackson is mine. Kind of under the radar after getting hurt senior year, but has some things to back it up. So I'll weigh in on that, and we will wrap up this edition of the Bengal Tiger Recruiting Podcast. For everyone, Charles Power, our director of rankings, thank you for coming on the pod. Shay Dixon to my left over there. Appreciate you as always, and Lundy bearing with us on the pod as she had to listen to us for a full hour and 10 minutes. Thank you guys for subscribing to the Bengal Tiger Podcast. We will catch you guys with another edition later this week. Appreciate all you guys who have subscribed to the site as well. You can still get a Bengal Tiger Founders Club hat if you subscribe. $30 gets you access until football season. So for Charles, for Shay, for myself, appreciate you guys listening, and we will catch you on the next edition of the Bengal Tiger Recruiting Podcast. Have a good one, everyone.